Hey, welcome everyone to the ArchiCAD User Monthly Training Webinar. This is Eric Bobrow, your host, and my special guest today, Roderick Anderson from Costa Rica. How are you doing, Roderick?
Very good, very good. Hello to everybody here today.
Yeah. Let's make sure that you all can see us. We haven't started to share a screen, but you should see our webcams and hear us. So type into the questions box where you're calling in from, and that you can hear us and see us, and then we'll get rolling. So, all right. Yeah, I'm seeing a bunch of replies here. Okay, perfect. So, Roderick, I'm going to make you presenter so you can show your screen, and then we'll just start with a little quick chat, and then you can start showing the projects. So, I guess I'll start with just a tiny intro, and that is that I've known Roderick for quite a few years now. I don't know, probably 8 or 10 years. It seems like when Roderick got started with ArchiCAD. Certainly we had some regular back and forth about how to use it better, and I believe you went through the best practices course at one point, Roderick. Is that right?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
And also your master template was, kind of instrumental at one point to get us to sort of get our grips better about how to put together a good ArchiCAD template. Of course, then we did ours from scratch, but it was a great eye opener for us at that moment.
All right. Well, I'm glad to have helped you get going, and I think you've really taken the best practices principles to heart, and of course, with a great sense of design and organization and business management, you've made your firm quite successful. Tell us a little bit about Sarco Architects and how long you've been going and what your focus is.
Well, the firm is, I'd say, about over 40 some years old. It was founded by my father. Originally was working as a design build firm, or my dad always worked as a design build firm of course, in local markets for local clientele. I took over the firm at a very young age. I was probably about 24, 25 years old back then. So I've been at the head of the firm now almost 20 years. And what we do and what we specialize in, or the niche that we have found, is working on high-end luxury residences for international clients. So we've been working almost exclusively for international clients of all nationalities for, I'd say, over 12 or 13 years now. And so we focus heavily on doing design build, but now we've opened up different markets and started working a lot internationally. So we're working a lot on design only on certain projects and doing design build on others.
Okay, and so you're based in Costa Rica, and the majority of your work has been there, but you've broadened out now to several other Latin American and Caribbean countries?
Yes, currently we have ongoing projects in Panama, of course, different locations in Costa Rica, some projects in Nicaragua, and now with this project that we're going to show today, this is a big resort project that we're doing in the Dominican Republic.
Excellent. Now, we talked a little bit about the transition, or at least the expansion of your firm from luxury residential. You want a home, you have a site, let's design it and build it for you, to a whole development where you've got a huge number. What is it, like something like 170 units planned? Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a very large complex. It's over 240 or 250 hectares of land that we were presented with, just raw land, and started working on it together with a land planning firm. So we were hired as the overall coordinator for the entire project, working hand in hand with the land planner. So we've been from the day one involved in the project, and still got lots of work to do.
Mm-hmm. So you explained to me yesterday when we were talking, or was it Sunday, that the project is going to be built in a number of phases, 7 phases, each one sort of a neighborhood or a group of homes, and some community or public building space that they share. So you showed me, give us a little bit of an overview of this particular of the multiple buildings that you've got. And then I know we're going to be diving into one of them to show how you're using ArchiCAD in this context.
Yeah, so actually I think I can quickly find here on my files. Let me see. Let me just a minute here. Actually, should have pulled this up for the purposes of just explanation. Here we go. So yeah, this should be good. So this is just the general overall map of the entire project. So it's, as you see, it's a massive, massive development. We've planned it into 7 really areas or neighborhoods, I mean, counting the back of house and services area, and also a very interesting sort of villa neighborhood right in front of the beach, which is going to be sort of like the coming together location for everybody in the project. So each one of these neighborhoods adapt to a certain area based on topography and based on how easy it was to develop. Of course, here we see a very simplified map, but this is quite complex because of how rugged the terrain was. So it was directly related to that. So this is just the sort of like a big bird's eye view. Each one of these little green rectangles represents one of the homes that we've designed for the project. We've designed a total of 6 home types. I'm going to be showing one of those, which is the one we call the Copay residence. And so part of our task was to come up with a number of designs that could adapt to very particular and repeating terrain conditions, so that we could come up for the clients with an array of designs that they could offer for their buyers, and that those designs could be eventually repeated over and over in different places of the development, but at the same time understanding that there's not a single piece of land here that's flat. Everything has a slope, either in one direction or the other direction. So it made things quite complex. So let me quickly show you here. I was looking at another BIMX file. I have here a BIMX of what we developed very initially as the as the phase 1 of the project.
And let me just explain. So Roderick is now showing on his computer screen and broadcasting to all of us from his iPad. And the reason why that's necessary is because Graphisoft's BIMX Pro, which allows you to not only look around in 3D, but also see the construction documents, only works on mobile devices, iPads and Androids. You can do BIMX itself on a desktop, but you can't get access to the construction documents. So he's reflecting or broadcasting from the iPad that is sitting in front of him.
Yeah, so this what we have here, this is one of those neighborhoods, the first one that was targeted for development. So this light blue area that I'm touching here, that's the ocean. So all of this area is directly oceanfront. And all of these home sites and lots were developed as of course, this first neighborhood. So here we have, I believe, 1, 2, 3, we have 5 of the designs. The 6th design will not go in this particular area. It'll go on an area just slightly behind it. But here we do have the array of the different designs. And each one of these, of course, this was developed at an earlier stage in the project. This was during schematic design. But doing this and grabbing each one of these ArchiCAD models, pulling them in as hotlink files into the overall, let's call it terrain or the map of the phase 1, was instrumental to determine the correct height that we wanted to place each one of the homes, and also to confirm our design decisions during that early stage, because one of the requirements that we had from our clients is that they wanted each and every home, at least in this phase 1, to have an ocean view. And the terrain here did have a considerable slope, but maybe not enough to just very comfortably say, and without deep analysis, that, oh, yeah, everybody's going to be able to look over the house in front. We needed to confirm that. So by doing this, we were able to not only confirm it ourselves for the purposes of our work, but to be able to show it to our client as well, which, for example, we could easily fly to one of these balconies here and just look around and look over the homes and see clearly that, I mean, we would be looking at the ocean in front. Of course, we didn't model the ocean all the way to infinity, so as long as we knew that we could see this slight part of water that we included in the model, then of course we're being able to look out onto the water.
So, Roderick, there's a couple of questions. I'll just relay them as we go. How was the terrain map prepared, and is there vegetation on the site that would impact sightlines?
Well, interestingly, this part of the project, we were brought in after they had already done some initial work previously with another company, and they decided to move away from that initial concept. So this particular area was very unlucky that the natural vegetation had already been almost completely removed. So we're actually working heavily with our land planners and landscape designers to recreate now very nice vegetation and landscape design around all of these home sites. So we didn't have to contend with natural vegetation for the purposes of sightlines. It was pretty much clear land. Now the terrain model, to address the other question, so all of this is one mesh. And we usually prefer, even though we have the ability through ArchiCAD, just to bring in through a 2D, maybe a text file that comes in from the surveyor information. We choose not to do so because, especially on something as big as this, it'll overwhelm the number of polygons that the terrain will bring into the model. So we prefer to end up just tracing it ourselves over the contour lines, and then we have a control of where we want to have more precision and maybe more density of contour lines, and maybe where we don't need them. So for example, here on this area near the point, we knew from the start that we weren't going to put a home here. So in this place, then the contours that were modeled were quite simplified. And also something else that we did here, which was nice, which helped for the purposes of representation. You see all these red lines that, you know, of course, when we turn it, they look kind of fuzzy. Those are actually walls. Those were walls modeled with glass, with a glass material, so they're partly transparent, and they were modeled to represent the property line, so that the client could see in 3D where each property would go. And of course, there are solid element operations here, so that they don't just jut out of the terrain, and therefore they just express themselves very, very softly, but they help for the purposes of representation.
Interesting, interesting. Tech question: what size monitor do you use, and what's the resolution? 2K, 4K?
Currently, I'm using an Apple 27-inch cinema display. That's usually my normal work setup.
Okay. All right. So we can move on. So this is the BIMX file from the schematic design phase, where you got approval for the designs, and you told me that it got pretty heavy. Like you couldn't really put in any more detail, but you did put in some of the exterior furniture as well as a reasonable amount of the detail just for the building shell.
Yeah.
So how big is this file? And you know, you said that you could only do it on a pretty good iPad Pro.
Yes, for the purposes of the BIMX, this file we can only open on a couple of very recent iPad Pros, which have the amount of memory and the amount of power to be able to open the file. We've tried to open it on older iPads that we have lying around here at the office, and they crash. They're just not able to open up the file. And so for the purposes of ArchiCAD, well, let's say this file, I'm sure this is not a large BIMX file. The BIMX file is only 94 megabytes, so it's really a small file compared to some of our others. Now in ArchiCAD, it's a different story. In ArchiCAD, of course, bringing in all of these models at hot links, it started getting very, very heavy, very difficult to move around on 3D. So that's where we said, all right, let's do this only for the purposes of schematic design, and not continue wanting to do this for the rest of the development of the project.
Okay. Have you had any significant changes that you've had to go back in and update the designs, or was the schematic design pretty well locked in?
The schematic was done pretty, it was pretty locked in. So we didn't have to come back and revisit too much. Again, this analysis that we were able to do on the BIMX was quite instrumental, and it helps us confirm things well enough at a very early stage, which then we could just proceed efficiently with the rest of the project development.
Okay, excellent. So tell us a little bit, then I guess maybe you want to get open one of your project files and tell us while you're doing that a little bit about your teamwork process, because I thought that was pretty interesting. You had two teams, each working on 3 houses, and you made sure that everybody stayed in sync in terms of the phasing and the deliverables so that you could coordinate all of the sort of wall types and surfaces and all the things that were being developed for the project. Is that right?
Yeah, that was one of the big tasks that we had with this project, because our work in the past had been typically just custom homes, custom residences. So they were one-offs, let's say, each one, and in each case we had a different client, different approaches, and each project would come in at a different time. So of course, in working with ArchiCAD, a good template is instrumental, but the template at the same time is always sort of a work in progress. It's always evolving. You're always putting new things into the template that you find out, and that you say, oh, I want this to work on the next project. So you're always feeding back on your template all the time. When we started working on this, and we said, okay, now this is an entirely different thing, because we needed to develop 6 large projects, because each of these are large luxury residences. I'm showing one here, but the rest of them are pretty much the same scale or larger. And we needed to come up with a way so that we would make sure that everything is pretty much standardized, that our final representation and our final sets of drawings would be cohesive between one project or the other, that they would all have the same language, the same specifications, the same look and feel on the drawings, because everything's for a single client. So before we started working on anything, we invested heavily. We invested probably around a month of time into going back to our previous projects, determining what had worked and not worked successfully based on how we had set up our templates, perfecting those ideas, developing them. Also at the same time, start to incorporate some new features that ArchiCAD 21 had brought in at the time, like of course parameters and graphic overrides. Well, those were already from 20, but at the time we hadn't had the time to start to go deeply into some of those new features. So we're sort of like playing around with them, testing them, and so forth. So in this case, we did invest very heavily on developing the template, perfecting it, so that when we got started with the construction drawings development, everything would flow from a single place. And yes, so everything that we do here at the office is based off of teamwork. So we set up 2 teams of 3 people, and each team had assigned 3 of the projects to them. And they needed to be working parallel somehow with all 3 of the projects, because each one of our deliverables needed to be partial deliverables, but of all 6 projects at the same time. So that was a difficult part of how to set everything up, but we were able to figure it out, and it worked out very, very well.
Okay. Before we go on, there were a couple of comments earlier about an echo, maybe from my side, maybe your voice being echoed on my mic. I've tried to adjust a couple of settings. And if let me know if that's improved or not, because I don't want to have that be an issue, for everyone. No echo, I get from Ken. Not bad now, Luther. No echo. Okay, all right. So my adjustments helped. So in terms of the template, I think it would be really interesting to look at some of the things that you did refine. So I know you talked about graphic overrides, and maybe we can look at that a little after, but just the basics. What were the things that you tightened up, that you in terms of the structure or the attributes And what are the properties that you set up? It's, you know, you refer to it as parameters, but I know it's because of the Spanish
Yep.
name. So yeah, let's take a look at some of the details of your template, or maybe just give us maybe we should jump into the project, look at the project more architecturally, because so far
I think we could. I think we could, and then as we go, we can start talking about many of these elements that we would develop and would perfect when it came to the template, and then how these were applied in actually in real life.
Okay.
So again, this is just I just have the home here on 3D for the purposes of so the people could see it while we are talking. But again, many things that we improved on the template are just sort of like dirty stuff, you could call it, but to make sure that things work out nicely in the end. So number one is to develop a good structure of your template in all regards. So we worked heavily on perfecting our structure on our view sets, also on our layout sets. Make sure that everything is automatic, that certain views are already inserted into the layouts so that everything starts to populate successfully. Also to make sure that our pen sets were coordinated correctly. This is, I'm just going to zoom in here on a section of the drawing. This kind of shows one of the things that I talked about on my presentation on the Masters of ArchiCAD a few years back, on my application of color standards for the purposes of working on the file, and then on presenting the file for final, let's say, final print or final representation. So we developed a color code where certain things always come up in a certain color, and you may be already starting to figure out it's very easy. So anything that's a dimension, it's always green. Anything that's an annotation is always blue. Anything that's part of the model is always black. And therefore, it starts making things clear for the person that's working on it, and for the person that's actually reading the final plans. Now, this is, of course, our working pen set, which represents some stuff also in color. So our plumbing fixtures are in this sort of kind of pink and so forth.
You've got some arrowheads showing. Is that because you turned off clean intersections or something?
Arrowheads showing.
Well, it looks like
no.
The walls.
These are probably the reference lines. Let me see. Yeah. So some of those are reference lines of the wall.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. And that. Oh, by the way, I should have said, because I sort of got used to looking at them. Before, they used to bother me having those reference lines showing. This is one of the things that we changed with our evolution of the template, and we decided that we were going to start working with the reference lines showing. The reason why at the end, and I'm just sort of going to jump ahead here, something that I was going to show later. If I go here to a finishes layout, where we show the finishes of the different walls. So all of these labels, all of these are automatic, intelligent labels. So what this label is doing is that it's reporting the name of the surface that's on this side of the wall. So in order to configure this label correctly, we needed to come up with two. So we have two favorites. So one that calls the surface name on the reference side of the wall, and then the other that calls on the side opposite to the reference side of the wall. So in that way, we needed to model very cleanly, always knowing where is our reference line. And our standard is that our reference line will always be on what we consider the outside. Of course, that's easy to determine on exterior envelopes. I mean, you always know what's going to be your outside. But then we, of course, developed an office standard where we said, all right, we go from larger spaces to smaller spaces. So, for example, on a bathroom, then we may consider the outside of a wall the one that goes to the bedroom, or the one that goes to the closet, and so forth. It's not a perfect, because on the design always there's conditions that don't apply to the rule, but at least we have a guide on where to go. So that's why we sort of got used to working with the reference lines on. And again, nowadays I just pretty much don't see them on my screen anymore.
And one just technical note for all of you listening and watching, those reference lines will never print. They're an on-screen option only. So they're a working tool as opposed to an output tool.
Correct. Right. So going back to where I was, sort of this area that I was showing, I want just to quickly show how our plans represent once we apply the pen set that's for final print. So this is pretty much, and turning on line thicknesses, or true line weight, I should say, then this is how it really does show. So you see anything that's part of the built element is always in black, and this way you can very clearly see what's just information, because everything is color coded. And for the purposes of working, then we normally work like this, where then by color coding, we also know that this thing here is a plumbing element, and we don't have to click it to figure out what's that weird line that we don't understand what it is, because the colors are talking to us. And at the same time, we know that always our doors and windows are going to be this orange color, and our furniture is going to be in green, and so forth and so forth. So
can you bring up the pen tables? Just point out a couple of the differences between the pen sets.
Sure. So, for example, this is our normal working pen set, where we have everything in color. Of course, we work vertically, so we know that, for example, all of our oranges are going to be the windows, all of our greens are going to be the furniture elements or loose elements. Our reds are always going to be columns, and so forth. So each one of these vertically means something to us. Then I've sort of left this untouched here. So this whole section here, I've left untouched from, I think, one of the earlier versions of ArchiCAD. I think either it was version 17 or version 18 when building materials came on board. So this sort of became part of the ArchiCAD basic template at the time, and I sort of left it there, which then we've used it to represent then on cut materials what's supposed to be the perimeter line and what's supposed to be the fill line for building materials. And then one of the things I did modify, or I have modified on my pen table, is I sort of grabbed a certain section here that I determined was sort of low use, and I created so this is sort of like a grayscale from very light to very dark, and each one of these are all 0.1 millimeter. And on this lower one, everything is black, but then I have a scale of 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5. So depending on what we want to do, then we have a control of either grayscale or black lines in different line thicknesses. So we typically apply this kind of thing mostly for 2D work. Maybe our detailing starts working heavily off of this, but it's very handy. And so we found it very handy.
Yeah.
So
I'll point out that before you go on with showing variations, that the upper section of the pen set is similar, or based on the international template of ArchiCAD. So if you're outside the U.S., then this pen set probably looks somewhat familiar in terms of the vertical organization of the colors. In the U.S., we have a totally different standard pen set. Not nearly as many things defined in quite this way. So to adapt from the U.S., if you're using U.S. library parts and things, there might be a few challenges. But I love just how clear your structure is, because I think you've taken what Graphisoft has done and thought it through even further to make it really work. So go on and show us some variations of as you switch.
So some variations of this, and I'm just going to stretch this so that we can see the list. Number one, we have one variation, which is, in this one it says architecture 50. Of course, we work in metric, so for us this is 150 scale. And then we have another one, which is architecture 100, whereas for smaller scale plans. So in here we have slight variations where we may not want that much color when we're working on a smaller scale. So that's one change that we do. Then if I go back to the 50, then I have another one, which is a variation for print. So in this case, most of the stuff turns black, with the exception of the stuff that's intended to mean something, like the dimensions. So these are the three colors that we use for dimension lines, and some of the stuff that we use for annotations. I believe these two colors here are the ones that we use for the level lines in sections and elevations. And this particular red here that's sort of out of place, this is the one that we use for the grid lines, the structural grid lines. And everything else is supposed to be black. Now we have another variation, which is the one that's intended for our architectural lighting plans, because we want everything to look pretty much the same, but with the exception of highlighting our information of the lighting design that we're doing. So we have that particular one. And then, of course, we have a variation for some of our interior drawings, or our interior elevation work that we do, where we may have maybe a little bit bigger control of the, so we may have a little bit of differences here on the 0.1s. So we may have a 0.1 and then a 0.15 and then a 0.2 and a 0.25. So a little bit more control on those drawings that we may be presenting like at a 1.5 scale or 1.10 or 1.15 scale. So we may have a little bit more fine grain control on our line weights in those types of drawings. And then, of course, we may have some other pen sets, some intended for MEP, some intended for site plans, and so forth. So, I mean, this is part of the development that we've been perfecting through the years and feeding back into our template. And of course, it was one of those elements that we worked on really perfecting our template to get prepared for this particular project.
Okay, excellent. I know that you used to use pen sets for all of your graphic controls, and that with the use of graphic overrides, you now have some more options. And I know what you showed me was pretty fascinating. Well, let's just make sure that you show that at some point.
Yeah, so I'm jumping here to just for the purposes of the example, and I think this could be helpful for for some of the users to understand what I was referring to of our application of color in a way of how we work, and then color on the way of how we present. So this is one of our lighting plans, and this is not an electrical plan. This is an architectural lighting plan where what we're just representing here is the code of the type of fixture that we decided to use here, and then just showing let's say, what group of fixtures are connected together, and then where's the control of that fixture. I'm not showing here circuitry. I'm just showing architectural lighting controls. So this is how we work it on screen, and then this is how this plan would show for print. So then you see just the very slight change of then furniture turns to black, where it was before it was green. And then doing it this way, things start to easily pop out. And you can clearly understand that what's being shown to you is everything that's orange, because everything is lighting. And everything else is just information, let's say, structure information, let's call it, to understand what we're showing here. Now, the other one, which I was showing you the other day, is and this is some of our new improvements, let's say, now working with graphic overrides. So this is a reflected ceiling plan, but here what we're showing is ceiling type information. We do still show the light fixtures, but we're not showing the connections of the lights per se. So our focus here is just to merely depict that this is a different ceiling surface than this, and that those are different than this, because this may be a cement board type of ceiling, this may be just a regular sheetrock kind of ceiling, and this is a wood ceiling. So what we developed here is a graphic override that what that does is that through a set of rules, let me just reserve this, through a set of rules, each one of these rules, what they're doing is that they're just calling out and say, grab all of the roofs We do our ceilings with roofs, and I'll just comment on that very briefly. So what it's doing is that it's grabbing all the roofs that are either regular gyprock or gyprock plus insulation, and then to those apply a different cover fill. So that cover fill, it's applying sort of like a poche at the 40% poche of a blue color. And then the next rule, probably this one, this will be the mold tough. So this will represent all of those gyprock mold tough ceilings. So this is sort of the mold resistant one, either with or without insulation. And then it's applying the green color, and so forth. So this set of graphic overrides also has some other things that we wanted to control. Because, for example, on our architectural plans, our furniture always has a fill, because we want that to cover, let's say, a pattern of a flooring that may be under the bed or under a piece of furniture. But here, we didn't want those to just pop out as white blocks. So we have here another rule that turns all of the furniture elements into a transparent fill. And that way, we do have the lines that represent where the different furniture pieces are, so that you have a relation to the lighting, but they're not. We can see and understand clearly the entire area of the ceiling, which is what we're talking about on this drawing. So graphic override really does open up a completely new avenue of what you can do and how you can show things. It's really, really powerful.
So just zoom out a little bit, because it's actually interesting to get the whole building and just see the colors. So the different materials of the surface of the ceilings, very obvious. Now you mentioned that you print in color, and I'm sure you also distribute things on PDF or BIMX. But you've all of your sets are done in color printing.
Yeah, we've now focused that everything that we hand in is all color printing. A few of some of the drawings that we do, maybe this may be one of the ones that are more color heavy, but most of the other stuff that we do is just color line work. So even though the print shop always starts complaining and saying that it's more expensive, so there's always a little bit of argument and a little bit of discussion in hand, but we get them to do a good price. Because in the end, this is how we show things. We're not showing big areas done in color. It's just colored line work. And it helps on the job site. And because we do construction here, we manage construction. So it helps the crews on site to just understand information so much clearly, instead of where everything is printed as black, because they can start differentiating what is what just by the use of color.
So one of the things that, I know you use BIMX quite a bit with your own crew. When you're working with other construction teams, are they going on site with BIMX, or are they still using roll drawings primarily, or what?
Well, at first, of course, they start using roll drawings because that's what they're used to. But as soon as we show up and we start discussing things on BIMX and displaying things on our iPads, and they start understanding that it just makes the communication so much easier, then they quickly start to want to use it themselves. And then they start to playing around with it. At first, just managing the 3D is the biggest challenge to everybody that hasn't used it before, but they quickly get a grip to knowing how it works, and it's really powerful. They end up understanding that it's a invaluable tool for clarity and for them to clearly understand the project in many ways.
Okay, so at a certain point later on, I'd like you to bring up the file in BIMX so we can just sort of see how in this context moving back and forth between drawings and 3D works. But I do have some questions that have come in. One is, how do you work with story heights for each building in one file? I believe you said each of these projects is a separate file. So in that context, you wouldn't have to worry about it. But you do hot linked it in when you did that in the conceptual drawing. Was that a problem?
When we hot linked it in at the conceptual phase, unfortunately, ArchiCAD 21 wasn't out yet. We were still working on 20. I mean, of course, since we work with the Spanish version of ArchiCAD, then one of the things that we just got used to is to have to wait around 3 or 4 months until the Spanish version comes out. So at the time that we were working that conceptual phase, we were still working in 20. 21 has the advantage of having the ability to bring in hot linked files and then just tell it to respect the story height of the file that you're bringing in. When we were doing this in 20, it was a little bit of a challenge with some of them, because a couple of the projects had different stories. Let's say one of the designs had sort of like a half story going down, which the others didn't have. So when we brought that in, then it just messed it all up. When we do that, then the solution is a quick one. It's a little cumbersome, but it works. Is to bring in one story at a time. Not to bring in the entire project, just to bring in one story at a time, and then you manually put it on top of the other at the right height. But the one other thing that we were careful to do is to make sure that we had the exact same story height between the different models of the homes, so that we didn't have that problem of inconsistency when bringing everything together in the single site project, let's say. Now, again, as we evolved into the more detailed development of the project, then each project became its own file, and then that wasn't an issue anymore.
Right. And you mentioned that later on in this phase, as you're actually getting the construction documents for individual sites, because you have the 6 unit plans that are going to be slightly adapted as needed for sites, that there'll be individual files, and you'll just be essentially optimizing the placement on the site. It was interesting. I'll just mention this because Roderick explained it, that the method will be to have a copy of the file of the actual building, and then move the topography underneath it or around to get the proper siting. So if you think about it, you've got this toy building, and you're moving the support to where it's going to fit best, and then of course making the slight adjustments in terms of foundations and access and things. So
correct. So that's our strategy, and I believe it's going to end up being something very efficient for us. Because again, let's say that this home that I have here on the screen, overall we're going to have, I believe, about 20 to 25 of these on the entire resort, and then we're going to end up having to analyze each one of those 25 sites and make the necessary adjustments on let's say how this thing is supported. And in some of those, let's say we may have a steeper slope, and we may need to develop a substructure to hold up the pool, and maybe on a couple of cases some of those terraces or deck areas that are on the sides of the pool then may become just elevated decks with a steel structure to hold them up. So that's the kind of change and adjustment that's going to be necessary on a case-by-case basis as each one of these homes are built. But the entire rest of the home is supposed to be exactly the same.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me feed in a few more questions here. Are you using CAD Image electrical tool?
Yes. So we use a lot of CAD Image tools. I mean, every year the pricing goes up slightly, and every year it hurts a little bit more. But when we see what the stuff that we can do with it, then it really starts justifying it. So, for example, if I go back to one of these sheets that were the ceiling plans, then, for example, that architectural lighting plan, which is what I'm bringing up here, if we were to just do that manually with lines or splines, it would just be completely cumbersome. And this just makes everything so simple, because you end up grabbing all of these light fixtures that you want them to turn on together, and select the light control that you previously put on the wall, and then just create a circuit. And it just mean, connects everything. And sometimes there's a weird line that goes in the middle of the pool and it's not supposed to go there. You manually adjust it, but it's very easy. And then also, as you make changes, let's say we may start redistributing some of these fixtures, or I end up deciding that we want one more or one less, and then we need to redistribute them. They're still part of that circuit, and you just update the circuit very easily. So it makes our work nice in the sense that we're not wasting time, and the staffers are not frustrated doing line work over and over and over again, because they have a tool that helps them make it automatically. The other thing that we use heavily from CAD Image, I think it was also evident when I was showing the section, is the keynotes. And I mean, I've been using keynotes for, I think, over 10 years now. And I wouldn't do specifications with anything else, I believe.
Okay, that's interesting. We can maybe take a look at that a little later. Let me feed on some other questions. So one, I'm not quite sure I understand. How do you keep each set to default to its own scale? Maybe referring to the pen sets. This was back a little bit, and I guess it's just, I'm just going to take a stab at it, which is that each view that you have in the view map has context. You set your scale, you set your layers, you set your pen set and graphic overrides, all of those things. So you make a coordinated set of settings. So that's probably what the best answer for that. So we'll move on because there are other questions. Peter Davidson, hey Peter, asks why, Roderick asks, why do you make your ceilings from roofs, using the roof tool?
Very simple. We learned the lesson the hard way. And then once we learned it, we said, oh, we have to do everything as roofs. I modeled ceilings as slabs for years. But then we had two problems by doing it with slabs. Number one is that at any given time, if I would make a design change, in the sense that I would decide to, you know what, we need this space to have a flat ceiling instead of a sloping ceiling, or otherwise, then I had to erase what we had already modeled, and then start from scratch and model a new element, and then put all the information that goes into that model element. Whereas if we do it with roofs, then if you want it flat, you just put it at zero slope and you have a flat ceiling. And if you need it to be an inclined ceiling, then you just give it the necessary slope. The other reason is that, and I'm quickly going to go here to our ceiling type. Let me see, it should be this one. Let me see if that's the right sheet. No, sorry. It's this other group here. There we go. It's this one. So if we go to this layout, which is the one that we saw before with the different colors. So we created in GDL a specific label. So we actually programmed this label, and this label, what it's doing is that it's reporting the base height of the pivot line of the roof, and it's reporting the slope. So this way, with the same label, we can report both flat ceilings and sloping ceilings. So that was another of the reasons why we made that change. But probably more importantly, the final decision is, I'm just going to show this other sheet.
So while you bring that up, I'll just say that in general, the labeling tools in ArchiCAD have taken huge leaps over the last few years, and you can report information from associated elements in a very flexible way. You programmed that, and it certainly has a nice graphic look, and it's pulling data from the element like the 5% slope. My guess is you could probably get something pretty similar now with the built-in labels, because they can pull so much information directly from the element. I'm not 100% sure of the 5%, in other words, pulling that data, but I would think that that would be one of the roof parameters that you could actually display.
Yes, I believe with the new ones you can. Now, the final reason why we decided to start modeling all of the ceilings with roofs is that when we were doing that mix and we were modeling some with slabs and some with roofs, the other problem that would show up is that when we wanted to create a schedule, for example, like this is our ceiling schedule. Here I'm separating or subdividing this schedule based on ceiling sheathing type. So we have all of our Durock ceilings listed, and then maybe our regular gyprock ceilings just listed. Whereas before, then ArchiCAD would not be able to list them together and give me one addition, because it would give me one listing, let's say one section of all of those that would be modeled with slabs together with one subtotal, and then another small group with the ones that were modeled with roofs with another subtotal. So that was kind of stupid, because then the information wasn't clear. So the combination of those three reasons that I explained are in total the decision of why we decided to then move away from modeling with slabs and then just modeling everything with roofs. And it just becomes very easy, because then our favorites are already planned for that, and they just know and understand that if they go to a slab, let's say if they go to, they may be working on a plan, and let's say that they go here to the slab tool and try to look for our favorites. Let me see those favorites. So forgive me that everything here is in Spanish, but hey, it's for our staff. So if they try to find a ceiling here on the favorites, they're not going to find it. But if they go to the roof and they try to find the favorites for the ceilings, then here they're going to have a folder that's ceilings, and they have all the favorites for the ceilings. So this is also part of the work that we did heavily in this developing of our template, of really perfecting our structure of favorites to just make it easy, make it error, try to reduce number of errors by really doing some heavy work in setting up our favorite structure in a logical way that would point the staff in the right direction, not start making silly mistakes just because they're still sort of getting to grips on how we do things and how we structure things at the office. So this also helps them in their learning curve with ArchiCAD.
Okay, well, we're getting a lot of great comments here, and so I think one thing I want to make sure that we don't just get focused on the questions. You're great at jumping around. What else do you want to show us today? Let's make sure that we cover some more of the meat, and then we can fill in some more of these questions.
Yeah, some of the other stuff that I wanted to show, I think I had opened up here. Yeah, so I've got it here up on screen. This is one of our typical, let's say, interior architecture layouts. So here we're showing, of course, kitchen area with the larger scale plan of the kitchen. In this case, it's a 120. So of course, then this is using another pen set, and the elevations, the interior elevations, are also using another pen set. The other thing you may notice from the interior elevations is that also by using a graphic override, we decided to apply a very light gray fill to all of those elements that are actual cabinets. So that, because these drawings are typically very line heavy, I mean, there's lots of information. We're showing the elevation of a cabinet, and then in this part it's being cut. So it's typically easy for people to confuse some of this information. Then by using a graphic override here, then it made life simpler in that sense. And then the other thing I wanted to also point out, let me just jump to the next sheet here of the interiors. So give me a second while this regenerates all those drawings. Is that we also incorporated heavily as part of our work on the template and our work on our projects is the use of parameters. So
properties.
Oh, properties. Thank you. I keep messing it up just because in Spanish it's called something else. So this particular schedule here, it's showing lots of properties that are with information embedded in each one of these objects. So in this case, I'm showing a kitchen. So what we have here is some of the kitchen appliances, maybe the kitchen sink, and a couple of faucets that go here. And then the information that's embedded here is, of course, the brand, part number, the models, and maybe in some cases some information about accessories that may be related to them. And all of that information is not just text entered in text fields, they're actually entered into the properties of each one of those objects. So when you touch that object on a BIMX file, then and you select the information of that object, it's going to pull it up and it's going to tell you that that's a GROI fixture and the part number is such and such. So we always want those BIMX files to be information rich to make life easier for the people building our projects.
Now, one of the things that I asked you about that I think is good to clarify, you had another room that was, I think, maybe it was a bathroom that had even more elements in it. Do you recall which one you were showing me with an interior elevation?
Let me go, probably the master bathroom. So let me pull that up.
Now, so I asked Roderick about getting the schedule, because the schedule is showing just the elements in that particular room. And so you said that you found it works pretty well to just have zones with, of course, numbers and names, and that the schedule has a filter. So initially you said that you do the schedule for the whole building or the whole project, to make sure everything's working, and then on any particular sheet you create a version of the schedule with a filter saying only zone number so-and-so.
Correct. So let's say if we go to our project map, let's say, let me just collapse here, details, 3D. So here we go. So this is our schedules list. If you see, it's very extensive. But then we have lots of schedules, and each one of these are numbered for a room number, based on the zone number for each one of those rooms. So we first start with a general one, which is probably this 001 schedule. I'm not going to pull that up because it's going to take some time to generate it. But then each one of these, the only difference between this and this is that the ones below are all duplicates of the first one. And then we just add a filter to just do it based on the zone. So
can you show that? Can you just open up the scheme settings for one of those?
Sure. So if we go to reserve this. So see, if we open up the scheme settings here, what it's asking for is to show all the objects that are in this layer. So we know that we only want to show plumbing fixtures in this particular case. We don't want any loose furniture or any other stuff to start showing up. And that well, in this case, they changed it. I see. They ended up changing it to the ID. So in this particular project, they changed it to the ID that starts with 005. And then, of course, what's going to be happening here is that each one of these elements, each one of these objects have an ID code, and then they all start with 005 dash something. But we found that either solution works. Either solution works equally well.
Okay. So getting comments like that your workflow is inspirational and amazing work, and yeah. So just a couple of then quick side questions before you move on. Do you use CAD image for your cabinets or basic ArchiCAD objects?
Cabinets, yes. That's one of those musts. I sometimes have fun with our interior designer, and I start kidding with her that she could build an entire house just with CAD image cabinets, because she starts applying CAD image cabinets in very creative ways for interesting things. So, for example, I'm just going to zoom into an element here on the layout. What this is, if you notice, this is a valve for a shower, and then we have the rain shower on top and the hand shower here. What this is a niche. This is just for your shampoos and your stuff, and this is supposed to be done with slabs of quartz or marble or travertine, whatever we end up choosing to do. But she ended up just putting this in as a single element, done with a CAD image cabinet of the right thicknesses, so that it's the 2 centimeter thickness. That's the slab thickness of the stone, and then without a door, and it's a single element. So it's pretty cool how you can start applying the CAD image cabinet in very creative ways, and not just to do cabinets per se.
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing you showed me yesterday or on Sunday was the your custom surfaces. So you're very particular with your interior architecture. I mean, you're designing that fully in-house. And so you showed me how you created surfaces based on either manufacturers' photos or your own photos of the tile. Can you just show us a couple of examples there?
Sure. So let me open up I'm opening up one of our finished plans, but let me just navigate here under 3D first. I think this will be more representative. Second. Give me a second. I have a beach ball here for a moment. There we go. So if we just fly into one of these bathrooms, then you see that even on the 3D, we're very, very careful onto applying the correct materials, that our materials are not just a representation of a stone. This is the stone in the format and in the size that we're going to use it. Even on the 3D, if the stone or this tile is supposed to start here, we're going to align it on the 3D so that when it shows on the interior elevations, it matches just from the model and it's not a fill put manually on the place where it's supposed to start. So we're very keen on that kind of thing. Now, when you start referring to how that works on specifications, let's say if I were to go to that same bathroom, so here on a finished plans, then we have these labels. These are all intelligent labels that what they're doing is that they're pointing to different wall surfaces. So this may be saying these EST01, it's maybe saying that this stucco type 01, and that may represent a color. And over here, PIN for paint in Spanish, pintura. So this may be representing paint type 01, and so forth. So, and the same with tile. So these are code for tile work or stone work, let's say. So these in ENC, and we have different numbers. In reality, when we started working on it, then when we go to our surfaces list, then let's say all of these, let's say are tiles. I'm just going to select one. But if we go back to the list, if you see we have 28 tile types. Now, again, going back to how we were working on coordinating stuff between 6 projects, all intended for the same client. So we did a whole list of all of the different stone or tiles that we were going to use on all of the 6 projects. Now, maybe not all 28 tiles are going on this particular project, but on each one of the 6, tile 15 means exactly the same and represents exactly the same, so that for the builder, this is easy and it's consistent. Now, when we're working on this, let's say each one of these, this might have been called marble gray, and then the next one might have been called marble light gray small, and the next one marble warm gray 10 by 20. So each one of these had names that meant something to us that would make it easy for us to work on it. But then for the final version of the plans, then each one of these surface names, we changed them to a code based on a legend, and then these just call out codes. Why? So that when we go to this plan, we don't have crazy names here that start saying marble light gray and marble dark gray small and whatever, because then these are just, number one, too large, number two, kind of crazy, kind of silly. So in order to avoid that, but still remain a good level of intelligence in the model, and then the automatic labeling that goes off it, then that's our strategy.
Can you show your properties? Because I noticed when we were talking a couple of days ago that you had set up drop downs for a variety of things. So these were the surfaces, and so they are obviously a drop down from the surface list, and you have a huge number of surfaces that you've developed there. But in terms of these properties, just take a look at 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah, so if you see number 1, we have a good, pretty long list of properties. And they're subdivided in sections so that, for example, this first section is just products. So this may be for light fixtures or plumbing fixtures. And then there's another set for doors and windows. And then there's another set for hardware, and another set of properties for roofs, and another set of properties for lightweight walls or ceilings and so forth. So just looking at a few of those, let's say if we were to concentrate on this one for the ceilings, then we may have ceiling type. So this is a drop-down where we have predefined the different types of ceilings that we were going to use on this particular project. And then the next one may be a code. So, no, this is the type, sorry, pull down the wrong one. So this may be the codes. So these are the codes that are called out by a label on one of those plans that just call out to this particular property, and that we enter the correct code. And then this may be referring to the sheathing type, so the actual type of sheetrock board or wood or whatever. Then we may have another one here for a true false, just to indicate if it has insulation or not. And then if it does have insulation, then there's another drop down just to show, let's see. Here we go. Oh, that's why. This one is not a drop down. This is a multiple option one. That's why it wasn't pulling out from here. Because in this particular case, because sometimes depending on how we apply our construction system, I may end up deciding to do a combination of two insulation elements, not only one. So in this case, I want a multiple choice. I may end up just selecting a couple, and so forth. So it just works down in that way. The reason why we decided to focus more on drop downs is that we prefer to pre-establish our options and then work on defining our options here on the property window, instead of allowing just the text box, then anybody can enter any sort of silly text. So I'm very careful on trying to reduce the number of errors, especially on specifications, and sort of limiting the options by using these drop downs is a good strategy. The other thing that we found also interesting, if you notice, one of these options is this 4 little dashes, and it's also selected as default. So I was telling Eric that in many ways I prefer on a schedule, if a schedule is gonna, let's say, go out incomplete or without a final review for any way, and it shouldn't happen, but let's say that it does. We all know that it happens. So if it's gonna go with some errors, I prefer those errors to be just omissions instead of mistakes. So instead of somebody putting a specification that's completely irrelevant to one particular application, I just rather the 4 little dashes to show up. That also tells a reviewer, if they're just sort of perusing through sometimes the BIMX, we use BIMX also extensively just for project review during our design development and construction drawings development process. So if they find a schedule that's full of these dashes everywhere, then they realize, oh wait, we'll still have some work to do on filling out these schedules and filling out these specifications, instead of just happening by an oversight that the correct specification wasn't included.
So these properties you developed early on because you wanted to basically make sure that all of the projects or all of the buildings files in this project, or I mean, you have project files, but then it's the big resort project, that they're all consistent. What happens when you add something later? I mean, I'm assuming that the world isn't perfect. At some point you add a few things here or there. Has that been a big issue, or is it just somebody's in charge of making sure all of the files get updated with some changes?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right, and it happens, and it happens sometimes more often than you would like. So what we do is that for internal communication at the office, we use Slack. So one of the things that the entire team is in charge is to say, if somebody needs to come up with something new, let's say a property, a favorite, a surface, a fill, anything that's an attribute or a property, as soon as they do it, they share it immediately through Slack with the rest of the team. And whoever has opened some of the other projects immediately has to download it and bring it into their project to make sure that all of them were kind of in sync. So it's just sort of like an office strategy, an office standard in that regard.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I know we have. So Scott asked, what was that called? What Roderick was just referring to as Slack, like to slack off, but it's actually a very, very powerful and very cool, easy to use tool for communication between teams. I use it in several different contexts myself. So here's Slack. You can see some conversations.
Yeah, and it works very nicely because it provides the ability, just to step out of ArchiCAD here for a minute. So we have channels here for each one of our projects. So if there's any discussion regarding this particular project, it happens here. And then the entire team is informed of what's going on. And then if anything's related to the next project, it's supposed to go in this particular channel. See, so everybody starts sharing stuff, and I don't know, we may have a question, then they just put a screenshot up here to ask me questions sometimes, and I just respond back by this way. So it's really efficient. So even when I'm outside of the office, they're still able to get a hold of me, provide enough information of context to be able to ask a technical questions that I can provide an answer and allow them to just keep going.
So speaking of communication, you've mentioned, the basic teamwork framework, 2 teams of 3, each working on 3 projects. Each project is a separate teamwork file. So 3 people plus, I assume you, are logged in at different times working on the project. Is everybody in the same office, or do you work remotely much? I know at one point I was helping you to try to get some things going between Panama and Costa Rica. What's the current setup there?
Well, currently we all work at the office. We don't have any off-site people, except sometimes myself, that I work a lot from home. So I have a good internet connection at home and a really good internet connection here at the office. So I can work from home pretty much as if I was sitting here at the office in my internal network. So it's pretty efficient.
Okay, and now there is some questions about consultants. So let me just see where are consultants using ArchiCAD as well? If not, how has the Revit integration been accomplished?
Well, consultants unfortunately do not use ArchiCAD as we would like, and we sometimes try to convince them, but they're very resistant to it, especially because we live in a country where they think that Autodesk is the only product that exists, and we're sort of like the weird guy that uses something different. So we unfortunately have to deal with DWG. We use a lot of IFC. So we end up educating our consultants, number one, on what is IFC, because most of them have never heard of it. They just know of Revit files going in one direction and the other, and they think that that's the only way to work. So we do, unfortunately, more education that I would prefer, but it's kind of inevitable. So some of the things that we've had to do is to, let's say, do an afternoon session at, let's say, our structural engineer's office with their drafting team and say, all right, let's do some test runs, teach them how they should export an IFC file back to us so that when it comes into our model, it comes in effectively and not just stuff floating all over the air. Teach them into the do's and don'ts of what they should have the liberty to do on their Revit file and what they're not at liberty to do. So one of the things that they especially the structural ones, end up for some weird reason deciding to do is that they start putting in additional stories into the model. And they put an additional story for their structural beams that go at subfloor level 1, and then another one for subfloor level 2. So when we bring those IFC files back into our ArchiCAD model, then it's completely messed up. So we work with them in the sense of teaching them the correct do's and don'ts of that sort of application.
So when you do bring it in, so do you have IFC information integrated into the file that we've got open right now?
Yes, some because of how heavy, and we had a tight schedule on this particular project. We didn't do as much IFC integration back and forth as we normally do on some other projects, but normally we do. So normally, let's say that our structural engineer will model the roof structure, the steel roof structure, and then we tell them just send us that on an independent IFC, and we bring that into our ArchiCAD model and just leave it in there. If it falls correctly and it's in the right place, then we don't need to do anything with it.
Mm-hmm. So when you bring in that IFC, do you bring it in directly? Now with ArchiCAD 21, you can literally hot link in an IFC, but I've heard that there can be some issues with that. So how do you bring it in?
Normally, what we do is that we just open the IFC independently on another ArchiCAD, let's say, copy, and then once we confirm that the IFC is correct and the information is correct, then we'll just copy and paste into our project. And if something doesn't go right, then very easily we can decide to just delete those elements and not dirty our model with hot link information and more stuff that may be contaminated within that IFC.
Mm-hmm. So you're copying and pasting because it's just a very periodic thing, and you just have things on a limited number of layers?
Correct.
Okay. And so then if there's an update, would you typically then delete the contents and paste it in again?
Yes. If there's an update, then we'll just typically we end up just grouping all of that stuff with a group on 3D, and then very easily we can just delete everything together and then bring in the new stuff.
Okay, excellent. All right. Do you create your own 3D plumbing fixtures, or do you use CAD image or some other add-on? There have been a few questions about plumbing fixtures showing heads and faucets and things like that.
Well, we do a combination of both. We're constantly doing research online and just constantly perusing the web on to see what's being put out there by the manufacturers. So if we have the ability to just bring stuff in from the manufacturer, we will. Nowadays, it's a lot easier with the Revit to ArchiCAD add-on that was created by the guys at BIM6X. Then it's a lot simpler because sometimes you have a particular plumbing fixture that's been modeled for Revit, not for ArchiCAD. Now with this plugin, we're able to use them. And sometimes we'll just model it ourselves. If we just can't find it, we'll just model it ourselves with morphs and just create an object out of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're using that Revit to ArchiCAD add-on from BIM6X, and it's proved to be pretty useful?
It's proved to be pretty useful, yeah. The other one I tried using as well is another one that's called ModelPort, also to bring in objects that were created for other software platforms and turn them into ArchiCAD objects. Sometimes it works very, very well. Sometimes it doesn't, but it doesn't depend on the tool. It depends on how the object was originally created. So sometimes it's just too heavy and it's not practical to use it.
Right. Yeah, I've experienced that. You know, manufacturers of certain types of products like sink taps can have them so detailed that, yes, maybe they can manufacture literally from the CAD model, but, you know, it's got way too many polygons for being placed repeatedly in an ArchiCAD model. Question, do you have any roof terraces or green roofs? And is your design based on modules? I'm not quite sure what the module question is about, but maybe you can interpret
I'm
that.
guessing that the question of modules may be if we have stuff developed as modules and then brought into the project. In this case, we don't. But on one of the projects, which was a multi-story building, I may just quickly show the renderings of those, so just that you have an idea what we're talking about. Here we go, gray renders. Now these are the interiors. Let's say these ones. Yeah. So on this project, it's also part of the resort. This is a 3-story condo units. Each condo unit is occupies the full story. Each one has its independent swimming pool, and each one of these slides back a certain iteration with regards to the one directly below it. So in this particular one, we did apply the concept of modules being hot linked into one main file. So I have one module file that's anything that's completely typical to each of these stories. So let's say all of the interior walls, all of the cabinets, all of the ceilings, anything that gets repeated over perfectly, then was modeled in the module and then just hot linked into the main file. So on this particular one, we did. On this other one, the one that I'm showing, we don't have any modules. And yes, the entire home has a green roof.
Okay, excellent. Question, are glass elements laminated type?
Glass elements, I'm guessing the question is on the specification of it. So yes, the spec that we're using here is double pane glazing throughout with low E glass for the purposes of thermal insulation with safety lamination, because we're not asking for Miami-Dade level of hurricane code, but pretty much we're asking for the same level of resistance because this is located on the Dominican Republic. So we're asking for at least all of our glass elements to resist 240 kilometers per hour winds.
Right, you got it. Yeah. It's definitely we're being reminded of just being more prepared for that than ever before. Okay. Question to get back to the specifications. How are your specifications done? You've shown how you have created properties to supplement the built-in parameters so that text information can be easily added to the elements. And we've shown interactive schedules with just a filter saying, hey, only show elements that have a certain ID or a certain zone. Tell us a little bit more about the specifications. You said that you use the Keynote tool from CAD Image, but I'm seeing interactive schedules, so I'm a little confused as to when you'd use one and when you'd use the other.
Well, for example, this typically our sections and elevations are the ones that are populated with the CAD Image Keynote. The reason why we like using it is that it allows you to just enter a label with a short code, and this code means something. So instead of filling up the entire drawing with lots of text, which in the end you end up not specifying that heavily because you end up running out of space to put all those text labels all throughout. So instead of that, I prefer to be able to put in much more specification information by putting in these short codes, and then each one of these codes refers to this legend that gets put in here automatically by the CAD Image tool, and then what it does is that it peruses the drawing by itself. The tool does it, and when you insert or update this legend, then it identifies which one of those shortcodes are present on this particular drawing sheet, and then it shows the corresponding long text specification. So if I were to show, let's say, my Keynotes palette, of course, working with Keynotes does require putting in the time, but you do this once, of doing your big database of specifications. So then you have this structure. In my case, I worked it off of the uniformat standard, which is very logical to me, and we use it for budgeting as well. So we just sort of work in that direction. And so we have this folder and subfolder structure that's fed off of the uniformat. And then here is where we control what B1011-01, which is a just cast-in-place wall. And then we have here the long description of that cast-in-place wall. Or, for example, in some other, let me just look at, let's say this one, the B308502. So here, B30, B3080, 308502. Right, so this is a polyiso, this is an EPS insulation. Actually, here I have a small mistake on my database. So this is the one that I'm showing. So let's say this one represents this one here on the sheet. So here I grabbed this spec ref field that's available, and what I did is that I populated here, just copied and pasted the URL direct from the manufacturer page. So when somebody opens this up on a PDF viewer program, then this becomes a live link. They can just tap it, and it's going to open up a browser and take them to the manufacturer page. So it's very efficient in that way. So this saves a lot of time as long as you're willing to put in the time to create your big database of specifications. Now, you can do this easily. I mean, you can do this right here, or you can just do this on Excel and end up importing it into the pool. So sometimes it's easier, just helps to copy and paste text and just make things a little faster.
Related question, schedule and budget based on unit format, please clarify. So.
Okay, so when we do budgeting, we present the budgeting to our clients based on the unit format standard. Many people work with master format. I ended up selecting unit format because I decided it was clearer for the client to understand. So let's say instead of me telling a client that a certain project is going to have X number of tons of concrete, I'd rather tell them where that concrete is going. So I'd rather tell them that how much concrete is going into the walls and how much into the slabs and how much into the footings, and then break it down into each footing type and each wall type and so forth and so forth. And that makes more sense with stuff related to finishes and so forth. So I ended up gravitating to the unit format standard because of that. And then since we're doing that, then we end up using unit format in our specification on the drawings. So when we do this with the keynotes, then we're coding stuff based on unit format. The other thing that we do is that if I were to show you one of our details sheets, let me just open any of them. So this is going to take a second while it generates each one of these details. Oops. What did I open? The layouts, details. Oh, I opened up the pool details, that's why. All right, so even while this is generating, you can already see it here. So each one of these details, the ID of the detail, we're already coding it based on a unit format code. So when they see that it's an E to 2013, they immediately understand that, oh, it's E, so it's equipment, so it has something to do. So this is not a detail of a roof, it's a detail where I'm showing the window work together with how the mounting of the shades are gonna work. Or if on this one I'm showing a parapet, so it's coded B3016, which is the unit format code for roofing elements. So we end up incorporating those standards into our coding inside ArchiCAD.
Okay, that's great. Quick side question, can you tell us where on the Dominican Republic the project is?
Pretty much the only thing I can say is that it's in the north coast in the Samana area.
On the north coast in the Samana area?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And you were telling me that it's so in terms of the time frame, it was interesting. You were awarded the project just at the beginning of last year, and you started design in you said April or something, and then over a period of about 8 or 9 months, you basically put together all the design packages. Is that right?
Correct. So we were hired end of March 2017. We started work on the 6 big designs at that time, and from, let's say, mid-April 2017 to last week, when we delivered the whole 6 sets of completely developed construction drawings. We developed the 6 different designs with full architecture, full interiors, full interior drawings, engineering packages, in completely finished sets of construction documents for all 6. So you could say that's a process of, roughly about 8 to 9 months.
And so you've got the complete sets of construction documents for the 6 unit types, and you also, some of those 5 that are on this property are multiple times. So you have different sets of drawings for each site?
At this particular time, we don't. At this particular time, our contract included just developing how we would call it the generic one. So what we did is that when we did the analysis of, let's say, which lots would have each home design. So we selected, let's say, out of the peninsula area, which was the phase 1, we selected the worst condition where that house was supposed to go. And then we designed it on top of that one. So this one that I'm showing here is on one particular property. Then the rest are easier to figure out because their terrain conditions are less aggressive than this one.
Right. And you were telling me, I don't know if you mentioned it earlier, that you designed in one case for access from the rear, because they're all going to have oceanfront views if that's available. And in some cases, they're going downhill, so you access it from the rear. And in some cases, you're going uphill in terms of the access. So that was part of your different design conditions. Now, the other thing actually you haven't shown, and I don't want to forget, you have a common building for the VIP restaurant and bar, and that has a very, very different feel architecturally, because it's public spaces. It's you know, it's not a residence.
Yeah.
So I'd love to see that.
Yeah, so I'll show that in a minute. This is the one that you were referring to. So this is one of the different home designs. On this particular case, these are designed for specific home sites that are sort of tucked up into the hillside, and there's no ability to access those from behind, which are sort of like the normal way you might do it. So these home designs, we designed them in such a way that you could just push them uphill a little bit, let's say, and the home is designed upside down. So you access the home from the front on the lower level, but the entire social area, including swimming pool and terraces, barbecue space, all of those social spaces happen on the second floor, so that we have some vertical separation for the purposes of privacy on those more social spaces. Because in the end, the home is overlooking over the road, where of course you have public traffic. It's just resort traffic, but it's still public traffic. So yeah, let me show that other building.
Yeah. While you're getting it open, I know a question about what is it rendered with? I know you use Cinerender a lot for internal use. I mean, obviously we're navigating around in the 3D window. You use Cinerender a lot for just the internal images that are placed on sheets, but you have your own Cinema 4D so you can export out of the ArchiCAD model and do some more entourage and lighting controls in Cinema 4D.
Correct. These ones, we used to render everything in Atlantis. So these renderings that I'm showing here, these were generated in Atlantis. We recently decided to migrate over to Cinema 4D. And now, let's say I can show some of these final interior renderings that we're doing. These are done in Cinema 4D. So, of course, here you see even much better quality of the rendering and the entourage and so forth. So we're in that transition phase right now of going from Atlantis, which was a great tool, and we used it for many, many years. But we always felt that for interiors, Atlantis didn't provide the quality that we wanted. So we now are transferring over to Cinema 4D and haven't really tested that much for exterior renderings just yet. But whatever next batch we need to do on our next project, we're definitely going to do them in Cinema 4D.
Right. Okay. And then one advantage is for people, Cinema 4D, I think, has probably a little bit of a larger learning curve than Atlantis. But one advantage is that it is a modeling tool, and so therefore you can take the architectural model over and then add things to it. You can put in, you know, the things on the table, and you know, just dress up things that you can't do nearly as easily in Artlantis.
Correct. In Artlantis, is a good program. It got severely improved on the recent version 6.5, and when they introduced the batch, or the sort of like the rendering farm concept, which was so helpful, because then at that time we could decide to just leave all the computers at the office turned on overnight, and they would be rendering as the whole team, and then rendering times are cut dramatically. But it does have that drawback that you can't add too much stuff except certain particular objects created for Artlantis, and you were sort of limited to that. In Cinema 4D, then yes, you have much more ability. So our rendering guy here, sometimes he just grabs some models that he finds online and then starts breaking them up. And if he finds, let's say, let's assume that he just wants a towel, and he's able to find a towel bar with a towel, then he's able to break them up and get rid of the towel bar and just keep the towel because he likes that, and then just put it into the model somehow. So it really helps with the entourage.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
What's the source of your trees and plants?
In the let's see, on these ones that I was showing, let me see. All right, so those ones, most of the good ones that we see here, and again, this is from Artlantis, most of the good ones I ended up purchasing off of, what's their name? ArchiRadar. It's an Italian company. It's an Italian website, but they make really, really high quality trees and landscaping for both Artlantis and ArchiCAD. Now you can buy landscaping packages of palm trees and bushes and that kind of thing, even for ArchiCAD. But I choose not to put them in ArchiCAD because again, it's just too many polygons into a model that for us it's already heavy to begin with because of the amount of information we put in the models. But we did use them extensively for Artlantis, and now again, as we gravitate over to Cinema 4D, we're going to have to find a good source for the landscaping elements in Cinema 4D. So unfortunately, that was one of those things that made the decision a little difficult, because then we would say, then, well, all this investment that I've done through the years in this library that I've created in for Artlantis, then I'm going to have to trash it and start from scratch. But I think the quality was worth it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and some of the things do go into ArchiCAD, so you can actually get them into Cinema 4D that way.
Correct.
So just the workflow for Cinema 4D, very, very briefly, do you have the same thing with reference files where you basically can re-export and refer to the earlier conversion settings?
Yes, the workflow is very similar, and with a couple of advantages, which in the end you can also do with Artlantis. Let's say that you forgot something in your ArchiCAD model to export out to the Cinema 4D, but it's just something silly. So it may not make sense to just re-export the entire model and then put it back into Cinema 4D. So sometimes you just end up selecting a couple of elements in your 3D window and then exporting out of that 3D window in ArchiCAD just with those elements selected. And then you import those into your rendering program, and it just falls into the right place. So it's very helpful also. Depending on what you need to do, you can do either one.
Okay, excellent. So go tell us about this this part of the project.
So this part of the project is going to be our first amenity building into the phase 1 of the resort. So what this building will do is that it will serve as the reception space, VIP bar and lounges areas, bars areas, restaurant, vacation club sales, real estate sales. So while the rest of the buildings that are going to go in the village area of the resort get built, then we need one operating building that is able to serve those purposes for the client. So that's why we created this one project, which is, of course, has a similar language materials-wise as some of the stuff that we designed for the homes, but of course, stylistically and architecturally, it's quite unique. So it's just going to be that very first welcome center or social building for the resort. And well, it's planned to be quite transparent. That is very obvious, as you can see, because of course here on the BIMX, I mean, you can't really relate it, but where this goes, all of this area that you see, all this green area surrounding it, is just dense jungle. So the whole idea of this building is that it actually sort of floats above the tree lines, above the tree canopies of the trees that exist here, that are pre-existing on this aggressive downslope. So of course, some of the ones closer to the building will need to be cut to be able to build a building. But the whole point is for this lower story that's clad with stonework, that really disappears out of sight behind all the tree canopies, and have the whole experience be very jungle-like, very transparent jungle-like.
So do you have any visualization that you've done as part of the concept study to show how it fits in and floats above the canopy?
Yes. So let me find something.
So obviously
here.
It's not in the 3D model because it's hard to get something satisfying in terms of all that vegetation. But I know with some 2D renderings you can do that. And while you're doing that, a question about, have you seen Lumion or Twin Motion, and did you choose Cinema 4D over these, or have you not looked at those?
This is Twin Motion. Now this image, this rendering we created in 40 minutes the day we hopped on a plane to go make the first presentation of this project to our client. And we did this in 40 minutes in Twin Motion. It's absolutely amazing. So for our quick representation of renderings at an early stage, we choose to use Twin Motion for those purposes. Of course, we end up deciding to move away from Twin Motion for the actual high quality photorealistic renderings, because it's just not capable of doing that, and I don't think that it's intended to do that. We also create animations with Twin Motion, so it's really unique. And again, then even some of these interior shots, these were created from Twin Motion, and this was again from that very first delivery, just from a very early concept stage for the project. These were all created in Twin Motion.
And where'd you get the human figures for that?
That comes with the Twin Motion library. It's very extensive.
Very expensive?
Yeah. Very extensive.
Extensive. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so it's free. It comes with the software. Now, these renderings that I'm showing here, let me just review them. Yes, these are still from Twin Motion. By this time, which was sort of like the second deliverable on the project, the Twin Motion 2018 had already come out. So these are prepared in Twin Motion 2018. And still, they're able to represent. Here you get a really good feel of that design intention of the building just floating above the tree canopies. And
so all of those, the vegetation is 3D in Twin Motion.
Yeah, all of that is completely 3D directly from Twin Motion.
Wow, that's something. Because I know how.
And then of course the final ones
down in ArchiCAD.
Oh yeah, that would be, completely impossible to do. And then these are our final renderings, which we created in Atlantis, which again we have extensive landscaping libraries so that we can represent this. For many years, I ended up going with Atlantis just because of the ability to represent the landscape. Most of our projects are either in coastal locations or in the middle of a jungle somewhere. So being able to portray the setting successfully is key to be able to sell the building.
So I know we've been going an hour 45. It's been fascinating. Is there anything else that we haven't asked you? I mean, there's a couple other questions lingering here, but anything else that uh, we would be
No, I think
missing
we've
out
pretty
on?
much, I think we've covered a little bit of everything on our, let's say, our workflow and in some of our work on this particular project, which was really been interesting, how we were able to put out this large amount of work with, of course, I mean, we had our gripes during the process. I'm not going to say that it was flawless, but the whole final product, when came out, we were able to meet our deadlines. We didn't extend our contractual terms, and we delivered a product that was, I mean, absolutely amazing for our clients because they had never seen a set of drawings as detailed as what we put out.
Yeah, very, very, very impressive. Luther says, "Awesome, Eric. My head is spinning. I can't breathe." um, and Tom's is fantastic. Thank you both. So yeah, we're getting some great feedback here. So let me just see. Yeah, Joe says, "Wonderful work, Roderick, and great workflow and ArchiCAD setup." So beautiful images in context. So I'm just always nice to read these. Joe Archibald says, apparently appears Twinmotion is only for Windows. I thought that they recently released it for Mac.
They did. Yeah. Twinmotion 2018 is now available for both. We choose to use it on Windows just because of the fact that I can buy a super powerful Windows computer with, I mean, just completely equipped through the gills with, I would say, about half the money that I can for a Mac computer. So we prefer to use it on Windows for that particular reason.
But you're on Mac there. What is your office split or what?
My office is split. We have a mix of Mac computers and Windows computers. So I mean, I'm working on one of the old trash can Mac Pros. I mean, it's now old. I mean, it's currently the one that's available. We're getting antsy for the new one, but I bought this back in 2013, so it's been going for over 4 and some years. And I have a couple of the big iMacs, and the rest are Windows machines.
Okay. So I think a couple of final questions. Just one has to do with getting the images for the tiles or for the surfaces, and the other has to do with design build. And what was it? Do you have, what was it? Something about conflict with design. Has the design build system posed any conflict of interest issues? I know you're not doing design build for this project, but in general, you've told me that design build has worked pretty well because you actually, it's in your interest to make sure that construction goes really smoothly because it's part of your profit centers, and it works out well in terms of remote clients not having to deal with multiple, managing multiple companies. You just turnkey operation. You want a vacation home in Costa Rica, we'll do it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I've been doing design build forever, and one of the advantages of doing design build is that I keep an entire control of everything that's going on, and we're able to execute projects like this, which are so difficult and so detailed. I mean, this residence, I can't even disclose how much it cost, but you can pretty quickly figure out that it's several $1 million. So I mean, it's just what we've been doing forever. I wouldn't see myself working on a workflow that's not design build. My philosophy, let's say, is that I'm design build. I'm not a builder. I'm not a contractor. That's how I sell myself. And I tell clients I will build projects if I design them. I will not build somebody else's design because I don't want to go into that conflict. But I can end up designing buildings or designing projects that I know I may not have an interest in building, and I'll just tell it straight out to the client, because I may just say, hey, our construction teams are located in this particular area. your project is too far away, or it may end up just being in another country. I mean, right now, as we're doing work internationally, I mean, I don't want to have building teams in Panama and Nicaragua and somewhere in the Caribbean, but we're doing our architecture activity in those projects. And of course, then one of those sales pitches or sales points, let's say, in our favor, is that because we are experienced in doing construction, and we're doing it for complex projects for so many years, that then our designs and our building sets, our building drawing sets, are thought out from day one into making things buildable, making things efficient, putting out the information that the construction team needs, not what the architect wants to show.
Well, I think your comments are very persuasive in terms of just the advantages and how you are able to really, provide better service through all of that. We're going to be finishing up. I know that there's another webinar coming up that will take over. If we drop out, and last time we had it with Andrew, literally as we were saying goodbye, all of a sudden everything just went by because one of my colleagues started up their webinar, and it's been 2 hours. I want to just pass along, in addition to just lots of great comments, just a beautiful design and amazingly well organized things. There's one especially saying, "Great job, Roderick. You were very generous with your time and experience." Thank you. So I do want to thank you, Roderick, for taking time out of, I know what is a very packed schedule, to share this with us. So you're going to be, you can't share this project because of your contractual arrangements, but you can share a BIMX, and we're going to have a BIMX of one of your Costa Rica projects. Is that right?
Yes, I think I need to just review. It may be either one of our Costa Rica projects or one of our Panama projects. Okay. I just need to find which one is more readily available, because one of the things that we like to do as we share projects is that client information is already removed for purposes of our client's privacy. So I think it's one that we had shared with Graphisoft a few years back already. So I can just go back and find that and share that. But yes, on this particular project, we are bound by an NDA with our clients, so we can't really share more than just myself showing this live here. Okay. Well, appreciate you showing us so much.
Just to clarify, or just a couple of things for the overall ArchiCAD user program, we'll be continuing once a month. I don't have the presenter set up yet for the April one, but I'm sure it'll be a good one. There are so many, very talented users out there. If any of you who are watching would like to be a presenter later this year, please just drop me a line to support@bobrow.com, and I'll definitely be taking a look at people, both the ones that I know, some of you are longtime clients, as well as others who, maybe I don't know, and if you'd like to share your work, it certainly doesn't have to be as big and bold as this. It mainly needs to be really interesting. In other words, how are you using ArchiCAD so that we can all be inspired and learn from it. If you want to be able to download the BIMX file, you'll need to sign up for the supporting membership, a silver membership. Basically, all of these webinars are free. I put in my time, of course, to set all of this up, but if you want to be able to download things, I'm asking for a small monthly amount to have access to that, as well as to the library of past webinars. So if you want to be able to browse through them, so I just ask for your help in supporting the endeavor. So Roderick, thank you again so much. It's always a pleasure to work with you, and I know we've worked together on, of course, the ArchiCAD as well as on the marketing side. Congratulations on your tremendous success just taking the firm. I knew you wanted to get even more international, and obviously you're not only going island hopping and around different countries, but you've taken your firm from one-off residential projects, even though they were impressive and wonderful, to a much more, much bigger playing field. So hopefully with the awards that you're getting for this project, there's going to be some more coming in the next few years.
Yeah, hopefully that's a reality. Just this project ended up awarding us 3 awards this year. One of those best resort architecture for the whole Caribbean region. So that was quite an achievement, and very, very, very nice for us to be awarded that. So I mean, it just helps, and we just are sort of striving each and every day to improve our processes, improve what we do, and just doing what we do, and let everything else sort of fall into place.
Okay. One other note I just remembered. Roderick taught. Well, he did 2 things earlier with me. One was the Masters of ArchiCAD Summit. So I'm going to be posting a copy of that original presentation on the ArchiCAD user site. And then Roderick also taught a course in how to use ArchiCAD and BIMX for design build. I mean, actually just how to use ArchiCAD effectively, and you can see what he's doing now. But in particular, how to sort of really leverage the power of BIMX and do it in the context of optimizing the construction process, both for design build as well as just, hey, you just want your builder to not bother you with RFIs and other things. How do you provide the information in a way that they go, this is just so clear, thank you.
Well, as let's say the construction counterpart of our current client here in the Dominican Republic, when we sent the final deliverable set just last week, then I followed up a call on him saying, "Oh, did you receive everything?" And his comment was, "Oh yeah, I mean, we're so impressed. This is basically not to call you back ever again, because there shouldn't be anything that we can't see here." So it's like, okay, maybe I went overboard.
That's great. So if any of you are interested in that course, it is still available through the Masters of ArchiCAD site, and you can email me support@bobrow.com if you need to, directions for how to check it out or sign up for it. So Roderick, thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. We've just gotten so many great questions and so many great comments and feedback. So Roderick, I'll be talking to you, and I'll look forward to that BIMX file. So when you have that ready, we'll post it.
Okay, we'll do. I hope to send that out to you. Probably not today. I actually have a meeting with the Graphisoft guys that are in the country today. So maybe sometime between tomorrow and the next day.
All right. Well, take care, Roderick, and thank you all so much.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.